Not a founder, but close enough. Go backwards, 1 second. Nice to see you all. I work for RIF Labs. We are the Purpose Trust seed foundation that created, develops, and contributes to the Rootstock blockchain, formerly RSK, you might know it as. We went back to our roots. And designers and builders of RIF, which is the scaling layer that we use to productize the Rootstock blockchain. Has anybody heard of RSK before, or Rootstock? Good. Diego's my business partner. Yeah, that's right. And maybe some of you have met Gabriel, possibly. Some of you know about Sergio. Some people. I kind of have a sort of dual nationality, partly Argentinian these days. Okay, fantastic. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about everyday DeFi on Bitcoin. This is something we've been building over the last couple of years. It's our strategic market vision of where we think DeFi is going over the coming months and years, and talk to you quite a lot about Rootstock. What Rootstock is, I'm going to start with the kind of vanilla principles and then build it up and give you an update on where we are today technologically and in terms of adoption. Apologies as I get used to this. So Rootstock was the world's first Bitcoin sidechain. Bitcoin sidechain there are some others, but we are the first, and we think we're the best, and we are obviously the most secure. In order for it to be a sidechain, the native token has to be pegged to the parent chain. So one Bitcoin is one rBTC. We can go into the peg in a bit more detail. You don't require any of the money or any of the tokens to operate the Rootstock network. You pay gas in rBTC, basically. And you have finality independent from the parent chain. So transaction finality does not exist in the Bitcoin blockchain, it exists on Rootstock. So the reason we developed Rootstock was basically to create the best of both worlds. So the store of value and the security of Bitcoin combined with the programmability, scalability, and of Ethereum. It was launched about 5.5 years ago. We've had 100% uptime. I'm going to take you through some of these things. I'm going to try and go into a bit more detail into security. So the way the consensus works off proof of work, a merge mining process. Has anyone come across this before? Just before I go deep into it. Yeah. So in very simple terms, basically the Rootstock blocks are co-mined with Bitcoin blocks on the Bitcoin blockchain. How this works is that when the mining pools are basically putting out their templates to all of the miners, the ones that we work with, I have a list there, so we work with Ampool, Pooling Brains, Binance Pooling Luxor, amongst others. The template goes out and it says mine Bitcoin. Some of them also say also mine Rootstock Bitcoin at the same time. So there's a 1 or 0 different header. What this means in simple terms is that 57% of the Bitcoin network hashing power today is also used to secure the Rootstock network. Hence why we're the second most secure blockchain in the world after Bitcoin, cryptographically and scientifically. Second kind of important principle around Rootstock is understanding how the two-way peg works. Again, in simple terms, you lock Bitcoin in the peg and then you unlock Rootstock Bitcoin, Smart Bitcoin, rBTC, has different names in Rootstock. We have, originally it was a federated model that ensured the security. We've kind of moved away from that to something which is called a sort of evolved proof of work hardware security module model. Basically, there's a bunch of hardware devices. We've got attested federation members, and there are 11 of them, and they're publicly known, publicly aware, and this is how we secure the Bitcoin over two-way peg. For a long time, this has been a kind of major point of attack, if you will, as in argument attack, not security attack, in why Rootstock is not decentralized. But over the last 9 months, a lot of the development we've done around the proof of the HSM module has kind of removed a lot of the threats that might be perceived in that federated model. So we've made huge advances recently. We also removed something called the locking cap. This was basically a threshold we put on the network to say that there was a maximum amount of Bitcoin that could come into Rootstock. We removed that about 2 weeks ago. So we basically put this cap, I think the last time we did it was about 10,000 Bitcoins could ever come into the network. We basically kept this in place just in case. And we removed that entirely, and everything in the last couple of weeks has now been finally open sourced. A lot of these elements were before, but there were a few things like the firmware for the hardware security module that was not open source. So the headlines here are all of the software, all of the code, and everything we do is now completely open source and verifiable. The locking cap was removed. Theoretically, all 21 million Bitcoin can now be operated on the Rootstock network, and there is essentially nothing stopping it from scaling. Store of value. So Bitcoin is a store of value, and it's the best store of value in the world. I'm sure you guys would agree. And that is now available. That basically you kind of back up a little bit here. So, two reasons why the Bitcoin component of the Rootstock network is important. You've got the security component I went through, but you've also got the fact that Bitcoin's native. You can use it, and you can do whatever you want on the network. You don't have to wrap it. It's available in a way that it isn't in any other network naturally. From a compatibility perspective, all Solidity contracts can be launched and run on the network, and you can run any of the 5 dominant Ethereum token standards are also possible to run on Rootstock as well. Fast transaction fees, fast transaction speed, so 30-second blocks, which means that basically transactions get processed relatively quickly. We've got a bunch of stuff we're doing on zero-knowledge rollups as well that will make it a lot faster than that, and we can do bulk transactions. Those are live on testnet at the moment. We hope to launch them later this year. Transaction fees are obviously very low, about 4 cents roughly at the moment. These are obviously averages. And we have just launched a parallel transaction processing protocol on testnet as well, which again, the whole point of this is to ensure that as Rootstock scales, gas fees don't go up and transaction speeds don't slow down. So where are we today? 100% uptime since live, so over 5 years. We have 180,000 wallet addresses live on the network. We are doing about 120,000 transactions a month at the moment. These have been going up significantly over the last couple of months. In the two-way peg, the mechanism that locks the Bitcoin and unlocks Rootstock Bitcoin, we have about $100 million in US dollars currently locked in the peg. And in terms of native total value locked, we're nearly at 300,000. So this is the Bitcoin in the peg and any tokens that have been launched in the network independent of Bitcoin. So this is kind of where we are from an adoption point of view. Ecosystem, as you guys know, like there's the network and then there's the ecosystem, and the technology without the ecosystem is essentially nothing. So lots of ways to get in and out of the network. We've got a load of great non-custodial wallets available, and probably one of the protocols you will know the best that's been on Rootstock for nearly 4 years now is obviously Sovereign. So the entire Sovereign platform is built and run on Rootstock today. We spent a bunch of time last year trying to understand where we thought the DeFi market was going and what our place within it was, to be honest with you. The layer 1 protocol space got quite busy since Rootstock launched, and there's a lot of competition to differentiate yourselves within the market, both as an ecosystem, as a network. Why are you different? There's a lot of table stakes around transaction speeds and this kind of thing. And generally speaking, like most networks are pretty secure, most networks have relatively fast transaction fees, most networks have decent enough costs of doing business in the network. So we tried to figure out where we thought DeFi was going. We came up with this strategic market vision of everyday DeFi. We genuinely believe that from everything we've seen in Latin America in particular, that we're going to see this moment where the majority of DeFi activity is not happening in what we call advanced DeFi use cases in Western markets, largely by, I guess, you guys, but actually by people in emerging markets using DeFi protocols to pay, save, borrow, and send in everyday tasks. So paying bills, sending remittances payments overseas, lending and borrowing small amounts, and trying to find inflation protection in an area where purchasing power is declining in those markets. So we believe that we're kind of entering this third phase of cryptocurrency adoption. And if you can imagine, the first phase is the cypherpunks and the hodlers and the OGs up until sort of 2017, and then the early adopter wave that we saw largely at the beginning of the pandemic and through 2021, 2022. And we think that actually the kind of mainstream market is represented in DeFi by emerging market users trying to use DeFi to do everyday tasks. In order for a server to be everyday DeFi, we think it should be easy to use, so simple UX and UI, and indistinguishable from Web 2 technology. We think it needs to be accessible, so we've good on-ramps and off-ramps, ability to transact at speed and everything happening on mobile. It should be fast enough to make on-the-spot payments, and it should be cheap enough so the service is not a barrier to adoption. We kind of simplify these use cases around save, borrow, send, and pay. Again, this is everything we've seen in Argentina, in Uruguay, in Brazil, in Colombia, where most of the adoption in Rootstock has taken place. We think that builders building everyday DeFi solutions need to focus on educating users so they're making the right decisions, safeguarding them from taking life-changing risk, simplifying processes and making sure that they're able to transact in a way which doesn't cause them problems, and adapting terminology, language, and services so that it's indistinguishable from Web 2. We, about 4 years ago, launched RIF. RIF is basically the acceleration layer for Rootstock. It's essentially the tools, protocols, and software libraries that you would need in order to run a service on Rootstock. We learned, obviously, in the early days that after launching this incredible network, adoption was a challenge, and largely that was because we didn't have example protocols, we didn't have the scale of adoption that Ethereum did. So we developed RIF in order to provide the ability for people to build useful, affordable, and scalable services on the network. We've been quietly building away over the last couple of years, and we're about to relaunch the RIF platform in the coming months. So what does this mean? So basically we have a non-custodial wallet, which is basically an open source toolkit so anyone can build and launch and run a wallet on the Rootstock network. We've got a name service similar to ENS, which is up and running. We've got a DeFi gateway, which allows different DeFi protocols within the Rootstock network to be embedded in any wallet. We've got a bunch of sort of payment and scaling solutions, so Relay, aggregation, flyover. Relay is basically a way to make payments without holding the token the payment is taking place in. So if you want to make a USDC token, you don't also need rBTC to pay the gas in the network. You can pay it with USDC alone. Aggregation, which is a zero-knowledge roll-up implementation, which again is going to be going live in the coming months. Flyover, which is a simple way to get rBTC in the wallet, and then USD RIF, which is a protocol which allows you to launch and run multi-collateral, multi-peg stablecoins on the network. That's it. I tried to cram as much information as I could, as fast as I could. We do a lot at IOV Labs. Hopefully that was a good summary for all of you.
Yep, feel free and happy to take some questions from the audience.
Yeah.
I've sort of tried Rootstock, maybe too early, but it seems to me it just lacks the UI, lacks the intuitiveness of MetaMask and just the way in which MetaMask works seamlessly with Ethereum. It just didn't have the same feeling. I think I used equality, and the interface with MetaMask wasn't good enough to trust it.
Yeah.
And I just wondered if, I mean, that's one thing to overcome. The other thing that strikes me as difficult to overcome is these protocols like Maker, Compound, Curve, Aave, which exist in Ethereum and give a lot of, I don't know, big liquidity attracts big liquidity. And you feel safer being in a larger pool, as an LP in a larger pool than a smaller fund. So there's a sort of chicken and egg type scenario there as well. So I wonder, have you thought about how you could overcome those? Every day.
On the wallet front, things have advanced a lot over the last sort of 18 months. We did a big push back in 2021 to get, I could bore you about our challenges with MetaMask, I won't, but to get as many mobile wallets as possible onto the network. So that's what we've been prioritizing. Web wallet coverage is pretty good. I forget the name, but the team behind MyEther Wallet did a really good new web wallet product, which is a lot simpler to use. That's really good. That went live a couple of weeks ago. So from a web wallet perspective, that's all covered, it's all nice. But mobile wallets is where we've been spending most of our time in the last 18 months. On the liquidity point, yeah, it's a challenge. But again, $300 million native value on the network now. We launched back in 2020 a fund, so it's a $100 million fund that provides liquidity to protocols that launch on the network. That's been up and running and going quite well. I think that was a kind of missing piece in the ecosystem. But our challenge at IOV Labs is probably similar to many of the foundations or teams that sit behind anything other than the top 5 networks, which is how do you bootstrap an ecosystem? And yeah, happy to discuss that later if anybody wants to. Yeah.
So you mentioned that it's being mined or merge mined with Bitcoin with a fairly significant number of miners. What's the incentive for miners or for pools to?
They get paid in Bitcoin.
In Bitcoin, not our Bitcoin. Okay.
Yeah, they get paid in rBTC. Yeah.
Okay.
But it's pegged, and there's a mining client that they run that allows them to swap between rBTC and BTC very easily. So, yeah. But again, it's pegged, it's effectively the same, although native and on network as opposed to yeah.
Yeah, there is a federation that secures the way back, right? So how many members in this federation and who they are actually?
Yeah, sure. So 11 members. We are going through an attestation process at the moment. So I think 3 have publicly attested who they are, what their wallet addresses are, and all of the kind of things that they need in order to publicly state they are the people attesting the federation. I can tell you who some of them are. So one is Jameson Locke. Sovereign also run one of the other attested what we call pegnatories. And the firmware for the hardware security module, the list of pegnatories and everybody else, it's all public, it's all open source.
So only 3 members are public, and the rest are...
Yeah, we started the attestation process a couple of months ago, we're working through them one by one.
So the rest is unknown, they're anonymous?
No, we just haven't taken them through. They're known, but we haven't taken them through the attestation process where they are publicly verifiable, not just known, but publicly verifiable.
And there's a multi-sig involved?
In the proof of work HSM.
The bridge between, there's no...
Not in the proof of work HSM, no.
No, not the proof of work, like how many coins?
How many?
People we need to unpack. We need all 11 or just
11.
So it's multi-sig, 11 out of 11.
Yeah, I think the limit, my understanding is the limit is 15. We'd like to take it up to 15 because this is a limitation on the number of multi-sigs you could have in non-SegWit. I believe SegWit allows us to go up to 50, but there's debates as to whether we should or shouldn't do that.